Hi, everybody. It's Julie, and today I wanted to share some really fun ideas using the oversized Hugs print die from Waffle Flower. So, as you can see, this set comes with not only the word dies but a coordinating shadow, and we're going to put that shadow to use here. Um, right after we get done cutting a whole bunch of hugs. And so I'm going to take a piece of plastic. This is from a grocery shopping bag. Before the pandemic, I would save my grocery shopping bags and cut them into strips like this. I'd cut the handles off and cut them into strips like this because it speeds up my die cutting. So I'm going to lay that down on top of my white cardstock. This is 80-pound cardstock, and I used a piece of washi tape to anchor that plastic on top, and then the die sits on top of the plastic, and then I can run that through my machine forward and back and reposition the die and do the same thing forward and back. I don't usually send it all the way through the machine. I just want it to come right boomerang right back to me so I can pop that die out and move it down the paper. And so you can do this, my goodness, for as long as your cardstock is and that plastic is, so you can mass die cut a lot faster than you normally would. And then you just use your thumb to remove that plastic. Now I'm going to take one of these die cuts to go ahead and do some ink blending. And I'm just making kind of an ombre effect using some warm colors of water-based dye ink. And then I wanted to make some DIY chipboard. So I'm going to stack 4 of these white die cuts together by using some glue. And once I have all of those stacked up, exactly on top of each other, I'm going to take the layer that I did the ink blending on, and it's going to be my top layer. So this is about 5 layers thick of 80-pound cardstock. And then I'm going to burnish it a little bit with my bone folder to make sure it's all stuck down and set that aside while I grab the shadow that goes with this. So I'm going to use a standard A2 card front and anchor that there with some washi tape, send it through the machine. I'll save that shadow for another project. Now I'm going to take my faux chipboard and hold that in place, kind of suspend it inside there with the washi tape, and then add some foam tape to the back of it. Then I'll remove the liner papers, and then when I close the card, that die shape is going to get stuck to the inside of the card exactly where it needs to be. And then when you open and close the card, that chipboard is going to pop out at you. Now I'm going to take one of those sentiment strips and go ahead and just glue that on. And then I added some sequins and a little bit of that Nuvo drops in the black for the centers of my flowers. And I think that's such a fun, sweet card, very quick and easy. And I think it's fun to see the dimension that occurs when you open the card and it's still there on the inside. Now, the next one I wanted to show you involves 2 different things. I'm going to be doing some faux embossing folder effects. So I would use that same method I just showed you to die cut a whole bunch of these hugs. And I'm going to use some washi tape to keep my card shut because it'll keep popping up on me. And then I am going to just use that ruler to kind of eyeball how I want to mount all these die cut shapes to my card front on the diagonal, just a slight diagonal. I think it's a very effective way. You don't always have to do everything straight. But I kind of planned it out around the first die cut I put in the upper third of that A2 card front. So everything else is going to get glued down in relationship to that first one that I put down. So then you can kind of bring them in as tight as possible. And there would be normally some overlapping because of the ascenders on the H and the descenders on the G, but that won't be a problem because you're going to be whacking stuff off on the outer edges. So once I've got that first hugs glued into place, and I used magnets to hold this all together. If you have removable tape runner or something like that, you can use that instead. But I have this little magnetic cutting mat and a bunch of these little magnets, so I just did it that way. So once I've got all of those, or almost all of them in place, there is one I realized once I got to this point, I could remove that one there on the left and set it aside because I had some overhang. And the great thing about this overhang is that you can trim off that excess. So I'm just using my scissors to trim off whatever's hanging outside the edges of my card. And then I can take pieces that'll work to fill in any gaps I have along the outer edges. And this is why you kind of want to start in the center-ish area and work your way outward when you're doing this kind of a technique. So I'm just going to go ahead and take some of those that I cut off and see where I can fit them in and create that cohesive look so it looks like the whole thing repeats naturally. So I'm just going to go ahead, and then whenever I have all of those final pieces in place, I got to let the glue dry for a little bit. I tend to get really excited when I'm doing this, and I don't give enough dry time to the glue. And then I get my scissors all gummed up. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and trim off those excess pieces. And then because I had an extra, oh, see, it looks like an embossing folder effect. It looks embossed, even though it's not. It's just die cuts. They're glued to the surface. I had an extra Hugs die cut, so I'm just going to mount that on top because there's like a reason. I wanted to have this a little bit thicker so it could withstand the treatment I'm going to give it here in a minute. Now, I did die cut this word out of some pattern paper I have in my stash. I've had it for a long time and never used it. I was hoarding it. So I'm going to glue that on the very tippy top of that stack that I did right there. And then I'm going to take some glossy accents and put a nice thick coating on the top of that. It's not super thick. You could always let it dry and then come back and do a second coat, but I thought that turned out pretty good. I'm going to set that aside on a level surface to dry overnight. And then when it's done, you have this really cool epoxy effect. And for some reason, the glossy accents just heightens the colors and makes them bolder and brighter than they originally were. So it's a cool look. So for this one, I wanted to do kind of, it looks like partial die cutting, but we're faking the partial die cutting. I've got a base card out of colored cardstock, and then I'm going to take just a quarter sheet of 80-pound white and position that die to cut right through that panel where I would want it on the front of my card. And then I'm going to take it over to my paper trimmer and just whack that top part off. I'm going to trim that little bit right there. That little interior piece, or there's a name for those interior pieces. I can't remember what they're called. But anyway, the negative. I'm trying to trim away that negative because I wanted to have all the openings of my letters with the color behind it showing through. So it looks like a partial die cut, like I said, but we faked it. So I'm going to glue that front panel to my base card. And then I already glued a piece of pattern paper after I die cut it from the Hugs. I glued it to some white cardstock that I'd already die cut in the Hugs shape. And then I'm going to pop that little sentiment strip up on top. So this gives you a bit of solid color and contrast. And the pattern paper doesn't overwhelm, but it does give a bit of interest to that die cut shape. So you could use stamps to add that kind of texture, but I had this pattern paper and I was like, oh, this is perfect. I'm just going to use it because it's easy. And I think it's cool because I put foam dots behind there when I mounted the die cut word because it looks like it's floating there in that space. And then another idea I wanted to share is doing some foiling. Now I have some scraps of cardstock. We all hang on to our scraps, right? I have scraps of foil, and that is toner reactive foil, but I think you can use any of the foils that are out there. And I have some double-sided sheet adhesive. This is Stick It, I think, and it's very thin. And I cut it into strips, and then I'm going to peel apart the liner and then go ahead and add it to the edge of each of these scraps of cardstock that I have. I have my scraps all stored by color in drawers in one of those iris carts. And it's like, oh, this is a perfect way to use up those scraps and use up the scraps of foil that I always seem to have and collect in an envelope. So I'm going to apply this double-sided adhesive tape, and I'm just removing the backing on the one side. And I'm going to do this to all of those, well, there's only 3. So I'm going to do this to all 3 pieces of scrap cardstock and just trying to line it up so I have enough there to add the foil to it. So once I have all those prepped and ready to go, I can go ahead and peel away the liner paper from the adhesive. And then I'm going to take those scraps of foil that I have and just press the ugly side down against the adhesive and burnish with the pads of my fingers. And then when I peel away the carrier sheet, I've got this foil on here. Now mine had some scratches in it. It's okay. It looks cool when you apply it that way. So, if you want it perfect, then you're going to have to search for some perfect scraps. But I went ahead and lined up my die where I wanted to get kind of that partially foiled effect along the bottom edge of the words. And it turned out so cool. And I was afraid I was going to be, bummed by this, but no, it turned out great. And then I lined them up on just a plain white base card that I just kind of rounded the corners there. And I got my magnets there to hold it in place. I did put pop dots on the back so I could pop those words up just a little bit. And then I added another sentiment strip. And boom! That's 4 different ways you can use this really fun Hugs print die by Waffle Flower. All right, I hope you got some creative juices flowing in different ways that you can incorporate this die into your designs. Have fun with it. I love the fact that it's huge and it has such a great presence on a card front, and it's bold, so you can have a lot of fun with different techniques on it. All right, thanks for watching.